I have a very special guest for you today. The father of raw feeding and the founder of the BARF diet, BARF means biologically appropriate raw food, Dr. Ian Billinghurst. If you're not excited, get excited because I'm very excited. Now, Dr. Ian is a nutritionist, an acupuncturist, an agricultural scientist, an author, a lecturer, a nutritional consultant, and a raw pet food producer. His background working with companion animals started with his vet practice in 1975. And in the mid-80s, following years of clinical research, he was shocked to realise the devastating effect that commercial foods have on dog and cat health, and amazed at the dramatic healing power of raw feeding. From this clinical research came Dr. Ian's first book, Give Your Dog a Bone, which was the original raw food book for dogs. This book, together with his lecture tours around the world to the UK, US, Canada, Japan, and more books that he's written since, became the spark which ignited the worldwide raw pet food movement. Dr. Ian is recognised as the father of raw and the founder of BARF, and he remains as passionate as ever about health through evolutionary nutrition. And this is a phrase that I coin a lot. And I probably have to thank Dr. Ian for that phrase because it's ingrained in me and I'm always saying it. But he remains as passionate as ever about health and evolutionary nutrition with his current lectures and writings emphasising the basic truth. Nutrition, it's absurdly simple. Hello and welcome to the Natural Animal Podcast. I'm your host, Ruth Hatton. I'm an animal naturopath and just big animal lover in general. Here on the show, we share thoughts and ideas about the nature of animals, their preferences, their behaviours, their ways of being, to engender a greater understanding, respect, compassion and love for all animals, companion, farm and wild. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, which is brought to you by Frontier Pets, creators of nutritionally superior pet food inspired by traditional whole food diets with a modern and ethical approach. Stay tuned for a special podcast listener discount. Dr. Ian Billinghurst, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely talking to you.
We have done some talking already behind the scenes, but yes. And I did mince some of my words, so I hope that doesn't continue on as we go. But it will.
Well, if you don't, I will.
Okay, so be prepared, audience. There might be some word mincing because we've got a lot to get through today. I want to give you as much of Ian as I possibly can. And we're going to start off with the background and the origins and the principles of BARF. And so, Ian, I would love for you to share about those shocking realizations that you had back in the 80s, you know, when fluorescent colours were all the rage, right? Remember?
Oh, were they? Oh.
They were. Did you not have fluorescent pink and green socks? I did.
Well, can I tell you something? I'm colourblind. Well, I'm red-green colourblind, so I probably wore those and didn't know I was wearing them. In fact, I have many pairs of socks that are different colours.
Mm. You could have been super trendy and didn't even know it.
Absolutely.
So apart from the fluoros of the 80s, you had these shocking realisations around the negative effects that commercial pet food was having on cat and dog health. Can you tell us about, if you can remember, because it was a long time ago, we're talking about the 80s, like it's 2024, like, you know, do you remember like the first of those shocking realisations?
Well, it came about because I decided to study, go into depth in acupuncture. There was a fellow called David Gilchrist. He was an Australian vet. I think he's still around. And
I think he is.
A bit like me, becoming somewhat dinosaurish. And but he introduced me to acupuncture, and I discovered after a weekend of learning about sticking needles in animals with a few formulae, I could make some incredible differences by submitting animals to Chinese torture. Anyway, and that's in deference to the Chinese method of acupuncture. Just the way I'll think about it. Anyway,
Oh,
So I
sticking
went
needles
to,
in, especially
yes,
to cats and dogs. They're like, what are you doing to me?
yeah, that's right. And then, oh, it actually works, despite my inept ability to actually stick the needles in. Anyway, so I decided to study acupuncture. So I went did a human course. It was about 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 nights a week. Took up a fair bit of time. But I met all these people who were kind of nuts, in a sense. They were studying things like Reiki and herbs, and
Energy.
homeopathy, as well as acupuncture. And they were lovely people. And one of them, in particular, started to tell me about the raw food that she was feeding her dogs or cats. Anyway, at that point, I had been persuaded by the family for the last several years to be feeding our dogs with processed food. And this came about because they were showing animals, or we were showing animals. It's the last thing I ever wanted to do, but nevertheless, I said, we have to feed the very best now. What is the best, as you were taught at uni? And of course, we were taught at uni the very best was processed pet food. So we started feeding that, and my animals were going downhill at a rapid rate.
Yeah.
And then I realised that what I'd been doing earlier was actually much closer to what we should have been doing all along, which was feeding them just food instead of this processed stuff. I think sort of combining a few ideas together here, but the realisation came to me that what I was seeing with my own animals, they were starting to develop itches. We had a few reproductive problems. We had some growth problems in young pups. I was constantly having to worm them, whereas I didn't have to do that before. They were showing signs of fleas, and just these things were happening, and all we had done was change their diet to processed pet food. So I decided to change them back. Now, I had already read a few books by Juliet de Barraclough-Levy, or I was reading books around that time, Pitcairn, Lazarus, just a few people, and I realised that what they were saying, quite a few of them, like they were all actually advocating to some degree grains, and I realised that I had never fed grains. We had always just fed food, raw meaty bones, because I grew up also. I know I'm wandering around the place, but I'd grown up as a kid, never allowed to have a dog.
No.
So in my lecture, I often tell people, if you deprive your kids of something, look where they'll end up. Whatever they'll start ending up with, what you tried to deprive them of anyway. But that's beside. So at the age of about 22, newly married, living out in the bush on a very poor and meagre wage as an agronomist, we went out every afternoon. Partly because also I was a young gung-ho man, and I had a gun for the first time, and we were shooting rabbits to feed the family and the dog that we had. And that dog's name was Candy. Now, Candy actually taught me more than anything about raw feeding, because she would go and catch rabbits herself. She would eat the rabbits that I skinned and fed to her the leftovers. She ate had a young family at that time. And what you have nappies then that you didn't dispose of. They were actual nappies you washed. So you emptied them out, and the dog ate the pieces. So I learnt the dogs were coprophagic, and they loved baby poo.
They love poo.
Yeah, they love poo. And so this dog taught me so much. She taught me about reproduction in dogs. Now, I was an agricultural science graduate at this stage. I wasn't a veterinary graduate. And because she had a friend up the road, she'd go and see about twice a year, and she would come back, and then over the next 9 weeks, she would grow a bit, and then she would. And I was living in a very old house, and she would scratch a hole in the bathroom floor, which was dirt. We were poor. That's dirt poor, isn't it, really, if you think about it?
Yeah.
And, yes. We were living out in the bush, just loved it. Anyway, and I learnt about whelping holes, how when a bitch, that's a terrible word, isn't it? The mum dog.
The humans have ruined the word, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. They have. But she would dig this whelping hole, and when she stood up, all the pups went to the bottom of the hole. When she came back, she curled around them, and even when she was giving birth, because she was in a hole, her nose was to her tail. She could assist the babies out, and they fell down and straight onto the milk bar, and she'd clean them up. When she stood up, they were all nestled together in the bottom of the hole. It wasn't flat, so she never squashed anything. And so I actually wrote about that in another book I wrote called Grow Your Pups with Bones. And anyway, but so she taught me just so much, just observing what a dog did left to her own devices. She was a Kelpie. Anyway, so here I am with the family. We've been feeding processed pet food, and we have all these problems that I've never had before. So I went back to feeding what we had been feeding prior to deciding to feed processed pet food.
Mm.
And within weeks, the problems just quietly disappeared. Then I started recommending this sort of diet to my clients, because up until then I hadn't really known what to recommend. It was kind of a mismatch of, well, we were taught this, but this is what I do. And then we started feeding processed pet food, so I probably started pushing that a bit more. But then I stopped pushing that completely, and I was writing out these simple diet sheets. And I was watching animals transform, often with problems that were very difficult to treat, like severe allergies, arthritis, even kidney problems, all started to slowly, and it took probably 6 or 8 months. It hit me. My God, all this stuff, this disease we've been talked about, it actually doesn't have to be. And what we're feeding and what we're recommending as vets to feed is completely wrong. Well, that's how it started. This light came on. Well, at that time there was a forum, and there still is actually. It was started by Tom Hungerford, a great old vet. He's gone now, of course. But it was Postgraduate Foundation put out this, it was kind of a newsletter every month where vets wrote in, and he said, I don't want the niceties. I don't want clinical trials. I don't know what you do. And he called it the blood, the guts, and the dung. He was a farmer type vet. A veterinary practice. He said, I want to know what you actually do. So I started writing in. I had been actually writing in about acupuncture and explaining that. Anyway, I started writing in about nutrition. Absolute deafening silence. I think I got a reply from one, and they kind of were almost ashamed to say this. He was a porcine, a pig vet. And he said, well, I've been feeding, when I autopsy pigs, I've got lots of pig bits left over. So I've been feeding them. That's all I feed my dogs. They're absurdly healthy. And so that was fun. And it was actually Ian Gawler's wife who wrote me. Now, if you know Ian Gawler, the vet, he was I think he's still around.
Familiar, yeah.
Yeah. He had osteosarcoma, lost a leg, and then opened a wellness clinic in Victoria. And Ian, if you're out there, mate, hello. I hope you're still going, mate. And anyway, so she was enthusiastic, but I realised there was no way I could talk to the vets about this. They did not want to know. Just deafening silence. So I thought, well, I've got to tell people about this. So what do I do? Well, actually, I was a little bit inspired by Burke's Backyard, because he always tried to write something or produce shows that were funny and that engage people. I thought, well, if I write a nutrition book, they are the most boring books known to God and man. So I thought I've got to write something that engages people. Anyway, so I sat down, and I think I wrote the first introduction was about 60 pages. And one of my clients, I was telling him about this, he said, Ian, you have to divide it up into chapters, mate.
Yes, I'm glad you did that. Glad you took that person's advice.
Anyway, so I took 6 months off. When I say take 6 months off, I virtually did nothing but write, wound the practice down, and after 6 months, actually, I was pretty broke. So I started selling things off, and because I had to then print the book. So we printed the book, and anyway, the rest is history. We went from there.
It's a lot longer than 60 pages.
Yes, 300.
313.
And so, and I used cartoon characters and all that sort of thing.
Yes, great graphics in there.
Yes, and so that's how the whole thing started. Then I was invited to England. We did 4 lectures, Birmingham, and I can't remember. I've got it written down somewhere.
Who invited you? Surely not Fats.
It was Catherine O'Driscoll.
Catherine O'Driscoll.
Yes, and she just recently died, sadly.
Rest in peace, Catherine.
Lou Gehrig's disease. Dreadful, very sad. But
Mm.
yes, she was very much instrumental in getting this whole raw thing started, because she was very much against vaccines for dogs. I could never totally join in that because I knew they were important, but not to being used. Not every year. It's just absolutely not necessary. And indeed, the strength of the vaccines for small dogs and puppies, I actually witnessed that causing problems too. But I won't go into vaccines now. That's not what we're here to talk about. But
you'll have to come back so we can do a show on vaccines.
Oh God, no, I don't want to talk about vaccines.
You don't want to talk about vaccines. It's such an important topic, though.
I could talk about that.
I have a blog post about them that links through to the World Small Animal Vaccination Guidelines that I wrote it in 2017. I get it's in every wellness plan that I give to my clients. Please read this blog post. And it's, so it would be, I know it's a topic of such interest because there has been a lot in the past for those who are open to it and have their eyes open. There's been a lot shared in the past around the over-vaccination of cats and dogs, but it's still really, in the main, pushed every year. When I have clients and they're, my vet's just sent me the vaccine reminder, and it's like, well, why don't you read this blog post, look into doing titer testing.
Yes.
I can't tell you not to vaccinate. I'm not a vet, but I can share information with you. Here's some information. Do what feels right for you. But, and there are some that are like very hardcore, I'm not vaccinating. There are some that's still vaccinating every year and the animal's got kidney disease and liver disease and they're like 11. And it's like, okay, please read this blog post and go read those guidelines.
And the reason they've got those
so it's
because of the diet that they're on. And I've emphasised for years that the problem is, if you're on a bad diet, you're much more prone to the problems that vaccination causes. And ironically, if you're on a good diet, your immune system is such that you don't need all those vaccinations anyway. But if you do have them, it's not going to be so badly affected. But we have this double whammy where they're on a terrible diet, and then we're assailing them with antigens presented in a form to which the body actually doesn't normally get them, not by being injected.
Yeah, exactly. They're not naturally produced.
Not natural. So it sits up there in many ways with diet as one of the major errors of our profession, the way we think about these things. Like we don't vaccinate people every year for everything.
You're speaking my language.
We don't ask that each meal be complete and balanced for humans. We ask them for a balanced diet at the time. Yeah. So we have this same paradigm shift. We think, and it all comes back to money and commercialization. Because I can still see. So I'm now on vaccinations, but we'll follow this up a bit. I can still see a little man, a furtive. I think of him this way: a furtive little man in a suit coming into the practice one day. We've got this sensational idea. Oh yes, what's that? Well, vaccines are harmless, right? Right. Are they? So that's the premise we're working on. So that was the premise. Vaccines are harmless. So we have this, and this is going back to a British actress whose name escapes me at the moment. We have this, he didn't say this, but it was kind of like this. We have this scathingly brilliant idea that we've dreamed up. We can vaccinate animals every year. You can get the ability then to check up on them, and we can say that we don't really know whether the vaccine is going to hold forever, so it's a legitimate thing to do. There may be some animals where the vaccine doesn't hold. And so this whole idea was dreamed up by the vaccine companies.
Yeah. And
the vets took it on board because it was a great way to get people in for an annual checkup to keep the revenue flowing.
Yeah.
And this is where it began. And it didn't begin with any sort of science that was necessary. In fact, there have been, since that time, there have been studies that have shown it's almost impossible to keep an animal in a vacuum, and they've actually tried to do this, where they're never exposed to outside influence of live viruses and whether their vaccination status wanes.
Yeah.
And they've had people coming in hazmat suits that can't. They've still been susceptible to the viruses. So it's almost impossible to keep an animal away from natural immunity. Once they've been vaccinated, they then getting natural immunity. A lot of that time is also from animals that have been live vaccine. But anyway, so
yeah, it's a huge topic, and I think it really does deserve its own episode on it, because we could go down so many.
And I can also stress that in areas where there is no vaccination, and there were areas in Western Sydney like this, where people obviously at the time didn't have the money to do it, and amongst particularly susceptible breeds, like some of the German breeds, the Rottweilers and the Dobermans, we saw terrible outbreaks of really bad parvovirus, for example.
Yeah.
And so I know that it's effective. And I know that early on, before they got a vaccine, because it's a parvovirus, we tried one of the feline viruses, but they were so weakly immunogenic that it didn't work. When they did get the vaccine, we got a resolution to the problem. So vaccines are important, but they must be seen in the light of real biology and real understanding of how they work and where they're applicable and where they're not, and where they're being commercialised.
Yeah, and that they can cause
those
harm.
Vaccines for different sized animals and for different ages of animals, particularly. I can talk on all that too from experience, seeing things happen, and then having discussions with owners. Are you happy if I give you your dogs a smaller dose? Because of this, that, and the other. And we did that, and we saw complete ability to resist the disease with very limited to no side effects when we started doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this was a private conversation I could only have privately with people because of the legalities surrounding all these things.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole thing about the science, annual vaccinations, I think that's even mentioned in the World Small Animal Guidelines for Vaccination. I think they actually call that out, that there is no science behind the annual vaccination, because they set out like this is the likely lifespan of each of these vaccines. Some of them are lifetime, some of them are 7 years or more, and that there is no science around every year there needs to be a vaccine. Like, it's profit driven. We'll get the clients back in every year.
And on top of that, there's this whole concept of herd immunity, where if we're using living vaccines particularly, those living attenuated viruses are actually out there doing this job as well. So they're reinforcing at all times. Ironically, the only ones likely to maybe require are those dogs that never go to town. People think they're the ones that don't need a vaccine, but they're the ones that are more likely because they are not getting that contact with these attenuated viruses. But anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a huge topic.
It is. And I think
really set out to talk about it.
Yeah, no, and I didn't include it in the questions that I sent you, so we're totally going off script here. But it is. I know a really clever way of bringing it back. It comes back to and you flagged this already. It's like when your animal is having optimal nutrition, the immunity is supported so that they themselves can prevent disease, or if they get disease, the symptoms are much less, because it's not just the vaccines, there's all the parasite medications as well, that if you think about the consistent onslaught of medications that are put into and onto our companion animals.
Parasites. I never worm my animals.
I don't mind either. They don't get fleas, worm stuff.
Recommended the traditional things because I don't know. All I know is I didn't do it for my own animals, and I would tell people that. But if you want to, this is what the profession recommends.
Yeah, give them the choice.
It's a very difficult path to walk at times because you don't want to cause problems. And half the time people are not, at least half my clients always kept me afloat because they refused to take my advice and feed raw. So that was fine.
Yeah, the animals kept getting sick. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And you'd see their eyes cloud over when you start, fine, look, I'm here just to tell the truth. It's up to you whether you take this on board or not.
Yeah.
And I will help if you decide to feed this way. I'd rather you actually decide to feed commercial food in full knowledge of what you're doing is going to cause a problem, because that's just intelligent. Okay, I just can't be bothered feeding raw. It's too much trouble, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm going to take the convenient way out, but I know it's a problem, but I'm prepared to suffer, my animals to suffer, and me to suffer the economic consequence, whatever. You know, it's like I'm really just try to be a purveyor of truth. I was never somebody who said, you've got to do this. It's just not in my nature.
Yeah.
I just like to tell the truth and let people work it out for themselves.
Yeah, I think it's we're both similar in that. It's always around, here, this is the knowledge that I can share with you. Do what you want to do with it. You know, once you've got the information, research elsewhere. Look at what else someone else is saying. Do what feels right to you.
Absolutely. Take it on board or not. Those who have taken it on board and really looked at it and thought about it, they've been very successful with their animals, strangely enough.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you know, when you were talking about the shocking realizations that you had way back in the 80s, and I just wanted to touch on that. You mentioned some of the signs with the itchy skin. What else was it?
Oh, look, ears, dirty,
ears.
Rotten breath, scurfy coat, the smell of the animal,
yes,
the poo that comes out, the sprouting, on and on. They're more susceptible to ecto and to internal and external parasites. Everything. And then slowly over time they degenerate. And these are the dogs that get arthritis. And yeah. I mean, I'll tell you one story that really struck me at the time. It was a Scottish. Oh, this is old age coming on now. The very long-haired.
I may not remember either.
Yeah, anyway, it was a dog with very long hair. Should have a large breed. It came in because it virtually lost all its hair. It was arthritic. It was terrible. And at that time, I just started handing out diet sheets, and I thought, they wanted to put it down. I said, just give this a go. And I thought, oh dear, is this going to work? Am I doing the right thing? Anyway, they came back 6 months. I didn't hear from them. And they had what appeared to be a new dog, full flowing hair, moving freely. I can't think of the name of this breed. Isn't that terrible? Anyway, I thought, oh, we've got a new dog. Anyway, it came in. It turned out it was the same dog. They'd followed the advice exactly. And this dog, the arthritis had disappeared. The hair had grown back. And this was one of the most outstanding. And from then on, I saw more and more cases. But this one stuck because it was one of the very first where we saw this incredible transformation, where people actually took on board what I said and followed the advice, and away we went. And it's been happening ever since. And I actually never ceased to be amazed and
by the improvements. Yeah,
by the improvement. It's just wonderful to see. And people say, "Oh, this is anecdotal." Well, I say yes. One or two cases anecdotal tend to starts just to verge on becoming epidemiological. But when you get thousands of these cases, this is epidemiology at work. We have one group of animals or people or patients being fed this way and transforming their lives, and another group being fed this way and their lives are going downhill. That's epidemiology at work. And people now start to understand that because of COVID. We've seen epidemiology at work going on there. So it's just wonderful to continue to watch it anyway. And I've just seen it ever since. And I still marvel that this profession that I belong to, the veterinary profession, is actually worse than it ever was. because
Yeah.
they are taught by the pet food companies who obviously have an agenda. Clearly.
And that's still the case, right? Like that's what I mean.
Yes.
I say that as well because I've spoken to vets in the past, and I said, who taught you nutrition in vet school? And they tell me who it was.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing that I always checking with. It's still that hasn't changed. I think it's starting to change, but
in some schools somewhere, but in the main, if I think of my old alma mater, Sydney University, I can go back.
Hills, right? It's Hills Nutrition that teach nutrition in Sydney.
I believe so. Yes, it is.
Because I've been there and I've seen it.
It's written everywhere.
Yeah, I was giving a lecture. It wasn't a veterinary lecture. It was an animal law lecture in Sydney Vet School in that building. And when I walked in there, everything, all the Hills advertising, and I was like, hello, you can't get more biased than that. And then it ended up being in the media around the funding that the vet school gets and everything. So it's public information. Like just Google, everyone listening, watching, Google it. You'll find this information. I'm not revealing state secrets.
No,
but it's like this bias. And it's like, I always have clients, it's like, why is my vet telling me to feed this food? I'm like, because that is what they've been taught. It's not.
You have to understand that vets go to vet school as a student, as an impressionable young kid. When they're taught everything else, which is brilliant, and they assume that what they're taught about nutrition is equally as brilliant.
Yeah.
And so they don't realise. So they are actually taught that raw is dangerous and it's a fad. So their minds almost get to the point where they think dogs are actually designed to eat commercial dog food. And
it's crazy.
Nothing could be further from the truth. And yet these people are trained as really high-class biologists, yet they accept this untruth, this lie.
I know, right? And it's like, well, what's the science of the anatomy and the digestive system? Do you not consider that? You're just going to take what these companies farmed out.
More importantly, what's the evolutionary background of the dog? And this is the real clue to the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I realised that a long time ago, but I didn't realise I had somebody in my corner who was much more prestigious than me. His name was Theodosius Dobzhansky. Have you heard of him?
Don't know. So many names.
I forgive you if you haven't.
Is he still around?
No, he died in about 71, actually, probably when I was just starting to realise. No, it was when I just started vet school at 71. Anyway, no, Theodosius, he was probably one of the most famous geneticists. He took hold of Darwin's theory of evolution and brought it up to date in many ways in the late 1930s. But in the 50s, he wrote an essay, and the essay was this: nothing, and it was titled this, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." And that is profoundly true just of everything, because if we want to understand why we behave in a particular way, we go back to our evolutionary roots. And all of this is actually written in our genome. And that genome sits, with a few exceptions like red blood cells, in every cell in our body. The entire script for our life obviously can be modified, so-called epigenetically, for anybody out there who's listening. But this is the script of our being. And into that script is also written how environment has affected us over since life began 4 billion years ago. And that environment now determines the structure of our DNA, and that in turn, the DNA then asks, if we look at one factor, which is food, that it be fed the food that its environment shaped it to want and actually require. And it certainly is not the politically correct food, PC, or poison chalice food, as I call it, that we are feeding today.
No, middle of the supermarket aisle food.
You have to shop around the edges for yourself and your dog too.
If you even shop in the supermarket, yes, shop around the edges.
Yes.
And the evolution, it's like, we're definitely going to talk about that today, because that is one of my favourite topics, is what is the evolution of the dog and the cat, and what does that tell you about the best diet for them? So we are going to, as I said, one of my favorite things to talk about. But as an intro to that, it's like when you go back to your dog, Candy, was it?
Yes.
Yes. And the power of observation and what you learned by observing her eating the way that she, eating the rabbits and the skin and the gut contents and all this stuff. And, observing her watching poo, the coprophagia, like the power of that and going, this is how a dog exists in nature.
But I didn't think of it then. I just did it.
Mm.
And I observed and I thought, well, that's what happens. See, I had no training. I was a trained nutritionist in cattle, sheep, horses, pigs, poultry, so all the production animals, but not in domestic carnivores or domestic, whatever we want to call them.
Dogs and cats.
However do we define them? Domestic companion animals, the cats and the dogs. Had no training in that. And so I just, but I had a background. Because although I'd never allowed to have a dog, I lived in the street with dogs, so I'd go out and play with other people's dogs. I knew that they were just fed scraps and bones and stuff. And I was a passionate reader. Well, still am, I guess. And in fact, my mum would say, "You've got to get ready for school, then read your books." I'd be sitting under a desk table, just reading because I
finish this chapter.
Yeah, that's right. And one of my favourite books was a book called, it's around here somewhere, The Dog Crusoe. Anyway, this was the story around Hudson Bay of trappers and fur traders out in the wilds of Canada with their dogs. And there were these wonderful descriptions of dogs and wolves eating food, and they were crunching through bones, and I could taste the blood and the flesh that they were eating.
Lovely.
Yes. But this was my child. I read books like My Friend Flicker, the horse books, and all that stuff. And here was I, a boy in the burps who never got to see animals except when Mum and Dad took us to the country driving. And Billinghurst just couldn't take his eyes off the cattle and everything. Just loved it all. So anyway, so I had this background of kind of understanding, and so I was totally in tune when the dog ate, and that's what you feed dogs. They eat bones, and so we went to the butchers and we bought butcher scraps. They ate our food scraps and the kids' food scraps and the poo, and they caught their own rabbits, and and so. This was my background. Then we went to go to uni, and I thought, I remember thinking, well, we're going to be taught the really dinky die stuff about dog nutrition and all that. Well, we were taught nutrition by an agricultural science undergraduate, not by a veterinary. And the bottom line was, if you can read the packet, that's all you need to know, as long as it says it's complete and balanced. There was no AVCO on the packet back then. It was just, as long as it says complete and balanced, she'll be right, mate. So that's the way it was, and it is ever thus, because now it just has to have AVCO approved. And
it's ingrained. It has to be complete and balanced. It's got to be meet the AVCO nutritional requirements.
That's right.
And a lot of these concepts, not just. I don't think you go so much into evolution and give your dog a bone.
Not
you really do it in your cancer, pointing the bone at cancer book.
That's right.
Which you probably don't remember, but you did actually sign this book for me. Best wishes,
I signed a lot of them in the early days.
13 November 2016.
Oh, that's really early. That's very early.
I bought it almost as soon as you published it. I was like, I have to get that book.
Yes, because I introduced it to the world, so to speak, in Melbourne in November of 2016.
Yeah, so I must have bought it as soon as you're like, oh, yes, I'm buying that. I have to read that. That's essential.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, it's a very good book. But in there, and it's in dogs, cats, and humans.
Yes.
But in there, that is where you speak about the evolution, and I grabbed onto that, and I actually have this I should send it to you. To see what you think about it. I actually have this diagram, and I did it for the cats and for the dogs, and it's like a chart, and it acknowledges, I'm pretty sure it acknowledges you on it, but it talks about the camp followers. You know, you use the camp followers, and we're going to talk about that.
That's right.
And
I'm trying to think whether, because at one stage I had left those out until I started studying the mitochondrial evidence and realised that, because it was, what's his name? Isn't it dreadful the way we forget things as we get older?
It's a lot to remember.
Yeah. There was another book called Dogs by, I can't think of his name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But he'd spoken to me about the rubbish dumps, and that made such outside early human settlements. But then I read about the mitochondrial evidence and went back, and I realised that dogs, there'd been a group of wolves that had actually separated out to some degree and began following humans, and they would have this mutual relationship, and that they weren't actually hunting together. The humans would hunt, and the dogs would scavenge their kills, and the wolves, I should say, and the wolves would hunt, and the humans would scavenge their kills. But there was this bond forming, and it took literally tens, maybe 100,000 years to form. We don't really know, but the mitochondrial evidence gives some idea. It may be in the region of 100,000 years where this group had separated out, and then it was this group that started eating off the rubbish dumps of mankind when mankind ceased being a hunter and gatherer. And so we had these bonds gradually forming, and we now know that the relationship between the genes that code for friendliness or acceptance of a shorter flight distance of a supposedly enemy, in this case between dogs or wolves and humans, that also codes for appearance, and that's why we get the different appearance of the dogs. And it's just it all fitted together as I studied and understood. I thought, wow, this is how it's all evolved. And
it's so interesting, and and I also how you call it. I think you call it or maybe it was my modification. Like you've got the pre-attachment to humans era.
Yeah, that's right.
Camp following era. The domestication era, where we saw the emergence of the modern dog.
Yeah.
And then you've got breed development era, when man decided to be like Frankenstein and create all these different breeds of dogs. The modern pet food era, the era of fake industrial food. And so, I plotted all this out with through like the years. So this years ago, and this is where we are now. And then I did the same for the cats as well. I'll send it to you. Whether you want it or not, be curious to really think about it. You might want to use it yourself, Vision for that. But it's interesting, and it's something that when people ask me about nutrition and real food, it's like I always go back to, Dr. Ian Billinghurst, who's an Australian vet, one of the really, principles that really, stood out for me was looking at the evolution and looking at them through the different phases of the evolution, and seeing how, more so with dogs than with cats, like cats are still very wild. They're not domesticated to the extent that dogs are, right? But when you look back and you see the evolutionary history, and there's a phrase that I say it in whenever I'm doing webinars in nutrition or in my diet ebooks, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's something along the lines of, paying attention to the evolutionary history. And then, most attention needs to be paid to the evolutionary history with some adaptation for modern.
Evolution. The thing is, evolution continues today. That's the thing.
Exactly, evolution doesn't stop, but how there's been that adaptations, and that's where you can see. I guess the most prominent example of that is the consumption of grain, and that study. You will know this study that was done in 2013, where they've came out and said dogs, the domestic dog, unlike their ancestor, the wolf, can digest grain. The science doesn't go into is it good for them, but they say they now have the DNA to digest grain, whereas their ancestor, the wolf, didn't and still doesn't. And that's 11 years ago now.
If anybody says that, I've actually looked very closely at that study. It doesn't actually say that at all.
What does it say?
Okay. So in the pancreas is an organ that is exocrine and endocrine. In its exocrine function, it produces digestive enzymes, and those it digests proteins, proteases, it digests fats, lipases, and it digests carbohydrates, amylases. Now, the wolf can digest carbohydrates, it has amylases, but over the years, there are some breeds that have developed more copies of the amylase gene. Now, what I point out is this. In the high doses that we give to dogs of carbohydrates today, it's a poison. So what we're doing, or what has now happened, is that those dogs that have been enabled to digest more carbohydrates are actually digesting more poison. So it's not a good thing, it's actually a bad thing. Now, the only caveat to that is, and I don't know, if there's, all genes are what's called pleiotropic. That means they have more than one function. And the prime example is the friendliness appearance type genes, where the more friendly dogs start to develop different coloured coats and different leg lengths and different shapes of faces, all that stuff that typifies the modern dog. But the pleiotropic, we don't know, and I don't know that anybody's done it, whether there's a dog that has more copies of the amylase gene than the wolf, whether that also has enabled them to metabolize carbohydrates in a more healthy way. I suspect it hasn't, but I don't know. But I think we're better to err on the side of caution and say what we've enabled the dog to do is digest more carbohydrates, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing, because this is the thing that drives inflammation, glycated end products, all those things that happen when you, and just the high insulin itself, that promotes cancer. It promotes obesity. It promotes the insulin resistance that causes so many metabolic problems in all species that we know of. That none of us are designed to eat these high levels of carbs.
And I really want to emphasize what you said there. None of us are designed to eat these high levels of carbs. And obviously the processed food, especially the kibble, is astronomically high in carbohydrates.
Absolutely, because it's cheap.
It's cheap, exactly. When you look at the evolution of the dog, and it's like nowhere in that evolution have they eaten carbs to that quantity until the processed pet food era or the fake industrial pet food era. And so is there a healthy amount of grains that dogs can eat?
I don't know the answer to that question.
If you go, and this is where
I think some dogs can eat some grains to be healthy. I just don't feed them to my dogs.
The reason I asked you that question is because, well, various reasons, and something that we briefly discussed before I pressed record was about, does give your dog a bone? Is it ready for a version 2? And because in there you break it down, you've got all those beautiful chapters. You took that person's advice, and you've got bones, meat, organ meat, green leafy veg, fruit, grains and legumes, dairy products, eggs, table scraps, and on and on and on, right?
Yes.
So you have that chapter on grains and legumes.
Well,
and my understanding from when I first studied this text in my nutritional studies back in 2014 was that some grains are good, provided they're only fed in a minority. And obviously, yes, different, the dog, the animals, the cats, whatever, yes, they all need to be looked at as an individual. But would you say your opinion has changed since 1993 when you wrote the grain chapter?
And because I thought that maybe I had advocated grains more than I did, but when I looked at it carefully, I was very dubious about grains. I pointed out that a lot of societies, I said, if you want a balance of the amino acids, you have to have grains and legumes together. because of the methionine lysine problem.
Yeah.
So But I reread it just recently because I thought I'm a bit concerned about this, and I actually had a lot of caveats on it even back then. I was very doubtful about it. As you know, as many people would know, I'm now working with a fellow called Rob Ryan in America, who actually consulted me years ago about raw and followed it ever since, the raw paradigm. And then he recently started looking at fermented foods. But that's a whole other story. I won't go into that now. But he was talking about his dog that occasionally he gives them some grain-based food. I think it's probably oats. I'm not really sure, because it's the only way he can get that energy up to this really testosterone-filled, must-on absolute athlete. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. I just accept his word for that. I mean, I'm also aware of glycogen loading, particularly for sprinting animals. I'm also aware that animals like the sled dogs in the Iditarod, for example, that race to the North Pole, they are fed a huge fat diet, and it's ketogenic. And so I'm also aware that
wolves are very athletic, and they weren't eating grain.
No, not at all. And people say, "Oh, they eat the gut contents." No, well, it hasn't got cooked grains, and it certainly hasn't got masses of grains. So, sprinting greyhounds, I know that some of the most successful trainers feed very little grain as opposed to most of the others. And what they do feed, quite often, they'll just throw a carcass in for a week, might be a dead cow, and almost consume it over the next week, or most of it. And so,
you did say
the jury is out a little bit on grains, and one of the reasons I say that is because some breeds of dogs have been fed a lot of grains over the last 2,000 years or so. Some breeds in areas where the grains predominated, and this is probably where the amylase gene started to. But these grains were whole grains. They were fed with raw milk, and they weren't the whole thing, because those animals also ate copious amounts of feces. They were free roaming. They ate a lot of other stuff. They certainly didn't eat like a dog that's eating processed pet food today. They're also very active. They probably weren't neutered. There was a lot of different things going on. And my consensus feeling was that, and as I look and consult with people today, those dogs that have got arthritis, diabetes, inflammatory bowel disease, kidney failure, all those things, we take them off the grains completely, and they do so much better.
Yeah.
So, I say this with a great degree of caution, maybe some grains some of the time for young and healthy dogs, particularly very active dogs and non-neutered dogs, may benefit, maybe, because they do have that capacity to digest. And if they are using them as an athlete and they are storing glycogen and they need it for very rapid sprinting, then maybe they will benefit.
It's a really good distinction, and thank you for that. And you did, just looking back over this, like I've highlighted this, and you are very clear in the book around, grains cause mineral imbalances. Grains contain small amounts of poor quality protein, stop the absorption of calcium, very poor food for growing pups, poor skin food. Allergies, not a great idea for dogs. You say grains, ... not a great idea for dogs. In other words, the majority of dogs, that is all the dogs eating grain-based commercial dog food, are being fed a food for which their physiology, their internal workings, is totally unsuited. And you do say things like, you talk about the reaction once starch is cooked, which is like feeding pure sugar. It's kind of like there is a certain permission, as it's like grain, particularly cooked grain, is not a food the dog has evolved to eat in large quantities. So it's, But yeah, and obviously you say, of the grains, oat is about the best grain for your dog. High fat levels, essential fatty acids, high protein, good source of minerals. It's still a grain. It can only form part of your dog's diet, and it should not form the bulk of it. As we've discovered, many commercial pet foods are heavy in grain, and this can cause numerous health issues for your pets, including premature aging, skin problems, allergies, and the early development of degenerative diseases such as arthritis, cancer, and diabetes. Dogs and cats have not evolved to eat grains in the large quantities that are common in pet foods today. One of my favourite pet food brands that offers healthy and evolutionary appropriate grain-free food is Frontier Pets. All of the Frontier Pets recipes are specially developed by holistic veterinarian Dr. Kathy Cornack to meet dogs and cats' biologically appropriate raw feeding dietary requirements. Yep, BARF. Learn more at frontierpets.com.au, and as a Natural Animal Podcast listener, you can enjoy 15% off your first order with the code NaturalAnimal15. This offer doesn't apply to subscription orders. Let's get back to Dr. B.
Yes, and what we do see is a lot of people will have a dog with digestive upsets, and a vet will recommend
rice and
chicken.
Yeah.
Again, that was a Stromberg. That was there you go. The memory sometimes works. He was an old vet. He's an old vet. He's older than me. It makes him pretty old. Who recommended this? He was a professor emeritus. It could have been Davis, one of those American universities, anyway. And he wrote a whole book on this. And what happens then is that people often say, "Oh well, the dog's done all right on this. I'm going to feed this," and so that's all they then start to feed their dog. And of course, that is totally unbalanced and over time, balanced over time. And I've seen all sorts of disease problems come from just doing that. It was a therapeutic diet that worked for a short period of time, mostly for diarrhea.
Yeah.
The alternative remedy that I've used: feed them chicken wings or chicken necks, and that will clear them up.
Yeah, the bone.
Yes, raw meaty bones. And so something came up recently too. Sorry, are you going to say something? Don't forget what you're about to say.
It's okay, I've all got it written here.
I forget all the time. There was this, apparently the latest fad is collagen, and people are getting collagen supplements and all this. I wanted to say male cow droppings, but that would be bad on.
Just feed some bones.
Yes, just feed them bones. And I actually made the comment very early on. I don't think I wrote it down, but many of my lectures said, "Look, I don't know all the reasons, I never will, why bones are so important, but dogs have evolved as scavengers, and as scavengers, they ate lots of bones. Therefore, it's in their genes that's what they need.
It's in their nature."
Since then, I've learned a lot about it. One of the most important things I learned fairly early on, actually, was that the cartilage in bones is anti-cancer because it's angiogenic. It's an angiogenesis is the formation of blood vessels within a tumour. A tumour can't grow if it doesn't form its own blood vessels. In fact, I think the word cancer comes from the crab, and that comes from a microscopic examination of the crab-like growth of blood vessels within the cancer. So this angiogenesis is very important. And one of the observations I made about dogs that eat lots of bones was that they rarely develop cancer. And if they do, it's very late in life. And if they do, it's very rarely a nasty form of cancer. It's just a little growth. And so this was another observation I made. It was a clinical observation. It was epidemiological because it was over a lot of dogs. And I realised later on that the cartilage that they were eating was keeping because we all form cancer constantly in our body. But if we can keep it at bay with the sort of food we eat, and I mean, omega-3 is also anti-angiogenic, but the cartilage that dogs ate was very much not only supporting their joint health, but it was supporting their immune system in its fight to keep cancer at bay, and doing that by stopping the growth of blood vessels. So, there's so many things that cancer does. There was another thing that came out recently that dogs that develop cruciate ligament problems, it's a manganese deficiency. Now, as a vet, as an agricultural scientist, I knew that manganese deficiency causes porosis, which is a slipping of tendons and cartilage problems in young chickens. And I thought, well, then I went, how much manganese is in bone? And it turns out quite a bit. And I realised that the dogs that were eating lots of bones rarely developed anterior cruciate ligament problems, getting their manganese. And the idea was, this other I'd read was, they said, manganese is in the fur. And I thought, yeah, but fur is indigestible. It's just used there. It just goes out and helps carry.
And it's not commonly fed. Where can you go to the butcher? I want the bone and the meat with the fur still on, please. Can't do that.
So the bone, and I actually, because very early on I realised the importance of bones. People just think, they're just calcium, so I'll just feed a calcium.
Yeah, exactly.
Wrong. Bones are so much more than that. And so, yes, I realised I would discover lots of reasons, and over the years, more and more. And you actually, I think you might have mentioned something that I say, which is nutrition is absurdly simple, and it is. You don't have to understand any of this. You just have to feed what a dog is designed to eat.
Yes.
And a diet based on raw meaty bones actually covers most of the bases. Throw in a few organ meats and some fermented food, and suddenly you're there. You're there.
But they're so often demonised, particularly by standard trained vets. They're dangerous. They're going to puncture organs. And I think in my work, like with my clients, it is more so the people that have the small dogs. I don't want to feed I always ask them, have you fed bones in the past? Are you comfortable feeding bones? It's really, really important, really, really beneficial for XYZ, da-da-da-da. I don't want to feed them bone because there was one time where, they ate it and it got stuck and I freaked out and so there's a lot of this fear around it. And I'm thinking of this in frame of, my clients who have presented these blocks to me. And so I know there's going to be plenty more people out there who have this fear around feeding bones. And particularly when they think, with the small dog, they're like, it's a small dog. Small dogs shouldn't eat those bones. That's for big dogs. But a small dog is still a wolf, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so you get the bones to suit their size. And if you are really, truly worried, then you grind them up and feed them as a BARF patty, so they get the nutritional value. And of course, if your dog has no teeth, or its teeth are really bad from a very bad diet, then again you have to feed them in a ground-up state. And as part of that's why the BARF patty became important. But people think that BARF is just one form of raw food. But it's just it only stands for biologically appropriate raw food. So it covers frankenprey, it covers whole prey, when I say frankenprey, that's bits and pieces from different animals. It covers BARF patties. And in my lectures I talk about this, I say, most people who've done this for a while, they mix it all up. But you did mention early on, that was before we started talking, or maybe it was during, about this whole prey model.
Yes, the prey model diet, no vegetables, no plant foods, just meat, bones, meat, organ meats.
Yeah, well, of course, that begs the question, when the wolf was out there and he ate gulped down a whole rabbit, was there somebody out there with a check sheet and a computer warning that wolf that he's just eaten vegetable materials, and wolves do not eat vegetable materials? Look, it's written out here, the whole prey model.
Naughty wolf.
Naughty wolf. In fact, and there's a whole list of stuff like that. It's a bit like how much bone do you feed? And
yes, it all comes from the AFCO stuff. We want to get the calcium to phosphorus ratio right.
Well, when you feed food that is not aligned with the homeostatic mechanisms of a dog, and that's politically correct, or poison chalice food, the artificial processed food, it doesn't work with the dog's homeostatic mechanisms. And then you do have to very finely get that calcium-phosphorus balance right.
Yeah.
I mean, it begs, I just think, how can people think that's got to be the way it is when dogs have lived out in the wild without somebody telling them how much bone they should eat and how much meat they should eat and make sure that every meal you've eaten is complete and balanced? It's never happened. It doesn't happen with us. It is simply a commercial constraint.
Yeah.
That's all. And it's a legal constraint, but it's got nothing to do with biology or sensible, and it's certainly got nothing to do with health. In fact, there's every reason to believe that making sure every meal is, well, not making sure, but not having every meal complete and balanced, where we might have a bone meal, we might have a meat meal, we might have a vegetable meal. It's actually allowing some organs and parts of the body to have a rest.
Yeah,
This idea that there's going to be this terrible deficient state ensue if every meal is complete and balanced is totally non-biological. It's non-scientific. Deficiencies take months, often years to develop because the body has the capacity. Now we say, the B complex vitamins, they're not stored. Of course they are. My goodness, we'd all die if they weren't. We produce enough ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the equivalent that is equivalent to the weight of our body every day. That is completely dependent upon B vitamins. And if we didn't, we would have no energy, we would die. And somebody can starve themselves or have a fast for 5 or 6 days. And, of course, the B vitamins are still there carrying out in the mitochondria, carrying out that job. You don't have to know all that, by the way. You just have to have common sense.
Yeah. And there's a few...
This is the point about this. It's common sense.
Exactly.
But
my brain
don't have it.
No, and Ian, my brain
tearing your hair out as we talk.
My brain is exploding because whenever you're speaking, it's like, I want to ask you about this. I want to ask you about this. So before we move on from bones, I want to ask you, and I love how you said, if you're scared to feed your dog bones, grind them up. Go and get a grinder and grind them up and put them in their food. If you are doing, home prepared. Otherwise, there's plenty of patties out there, including your patties that have ground up bone in them. But is bone meal an equal substitute? Or and I'm going to totally forget the proper name of it, or the healthiest version, the MCHA, the monocrystalline hydroxyapatite. I think I got it right. Oh my God. Is that is that an equal substitute, or are you just better off get a grinder and grind those bones if your dog's not going to eat whole bones?
It's not an equal substitute because it's not equivalent to what happened over evolutionary time.
Yes, the wolves aren't. There's not a bone meal tree.
No, absolutely not. And if it's bone meal, it's probably come from where bones have been sawn. And so it probably doesn't have a lot of cartilage in it, a lot of marrow in it.
Yeah.
It's just the solid bones, which is basically hydroxyapatite in a protein matrix, so plenty of collagen, but it's not the whole bone.
Yeah.
And there's no eating exercise.
Of course. You talk about that a lot in here.
Yes.
Give your dog a bone for people listening, not watching. The jaw exercise. And just the sheer enjoyment.
Ever watch a dog eat on a large bone? Front feet planted firmly on the bone.
Whole front body. Back body,
ripping and tearing. The back body is working too because it's planted. This dog has got this massive isometric exercise, but it's also good for the psyche.
Yes.
Oh, it just goes on and on.
Exercising, natural behaviours, mental enrichment.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. See,
all the things.
Just take notice of what your dog actually does and wants, and hey,
yeah,
it's very simple. Forget all the science rubbish and all the trends. Your dog will teach you what you need to do.
Yes.
Or your cat.
Or your cat. Like Max is like, all this talk about canines. Come on, people, get with it. Right. What about us beautiful felines? Don't worry, cat lovers. we may not know, but I will never have a conversation that's just around dogs. I'm always going to bring the cats in because, hello, cat lady.
Well, I've got a cat. Well, we've always had cats too, but this one absolutely tells me what is required and when and how. I'm having dinner up in my bed tonight. I'm having it outside. No, I'm not going to eat it down on the floor there. I'm going to have it over here. Kindly pick it up and put it where I need it.
Yes, God. Come on, human, work for me. I want it here now. I'm bored of eating it there. Yes, this guy, Max, he's very good. He's very good for that. And I'm like, where do you want it? In the bedroom? Okay, come on. We'll shut the door so Elvie doesn't come and steal it from you. Right. Yeah, crazy. And also the bone meal probably doesn't have that angiogenesis.
Well, anti-angiogenesis, that's right, because it's lacking in the cartilage.
Yeah, exactly. So people, lesson from this segment of this part of the conversation, the bones are really important, the real bones, and you just got to look at the
and not smoked bones.
Appropriate, not smoked, raw meaty bones.
That's right.
The size that is appropriate for your dog. And I always say, and correct me if I'm wrong or give me your opinion, you can never go too big, but you can go too small. And the general rule of thumb is it should be large or at least equal to the width of the jaw. What do you say?
I've never heard that rule before, but
I didn't make it up, I promise. It could have been a download from the universe, but no, I read it somewhere.
Well, if the dog, if it's big enough and your dog's a gulper that it can actually take down its trachea, that's a dangerous bone. Mostly if he swallows it down his esophagus, that's where you swallow things, if I recall rightly, and it's not lubricated enough, in other words, not slimy enough, not covered enough mucus, the dog will usually vomit it up again.
I've had this scenario occur.
The result is that people want to take it away. Don't do that.
Yeah, let
They're
them.
covered in beautiful slime. Make it go down much more easily. And they will probably take a bit more time chewing it now and enjoying it.
Do. Speaking about anecdotal evidence, I only have a case study of one, but it's something, again, through observation that I'm always telling my clients when it comes up is I had a greyhound and it was the first time as soon as I got him, he was a rescue from the trainer actually surrendered him, not the owner, the trainer. And as soon as I got him, shocking teeth, shocking. And I was like, right, we got to get some raw meaty bones into you, Louis, and he loved them. And a few years, was the first occasion that I tried turkey neck. And obviously turkey neck is that weird curved shape. So I just put it out there on his dog bed out on the deck, and he's eating it and I'm getting ready. This is when I was still working for someone else and I was getting ready for my day. And then I hear this vomiting. I'm like, oh my God, I should have supervised him. It's the first time he's eaten a turkey neck. So I go out there, vomited, regurgitated turkey neck all on his bed. I'm like, Louis, are you okay? And because I have trust in his own inherent knowledge and wisdom, are you okay? He's like, get out of my way. I want to eat my vomit. And he just ate the regurgitated turkey neck and he was absolutely fine. Off I went to work.
Yes. Well, and sadly, people at that point, that's
take it away
when they never have bones again.
Yeah.
Because they see this happen. It's just it's normal. It's absolutely normal. And that's just part of what dogs do. And sadly too, vets will often, when they're x-raying for something, whatever, it might even be for a digestive problem, they'll see bone in the stomach and they'll gasp, horror, there's bone in there. And they want to actually, I know one spent $1,000. I knew the person, although the person spent $1,000 because the vet went in and removed the door.
Oh my gosh. Oy.
Yes.
Blows your mind, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So what about vegetables? I mean, you talk about vegetables in Give Your Dog a Bone. You talk about vegetables in the cancer book. Tell us why we should be feeding vegetables.
Well, probably young dogs, apart from becoming used to eating them, probably don't actually require them.
young dogs?
Young dogs.
Puppies?
Well,
or a bit older?
When I say don't actually require them, that's probably a bit over the top. A lot of young dogs, the way they're presented, if you just presented them as veggies, probably wouldn't eat them. But sometimes they do. Look, what's the benefit of veggies? Are dogs designed to eat them? Well, dogs have always eaten, at least in part, the gut contents of their prey, at least in part, particularly in tough times. That's one thing I do know from a number of sources. Even wolves in tough times will do that. And a lot of the studies, I'm thinking of one fellow who got his book around mech. Might even have it up here. Oh, yeah. David's mech's book.
Wolf.
I mean, I've read that, and a lot of his work on that comes out of his studies in wolf parks. In wolf parks, the dogs or the wolves are fed a carcass, but they never have to really work for their food in the sense that they don't ever starve. So
it's always
observations and people's recording of his observations that wolves don't rarely eat or never don't need vegetables comes out from there. Look, I'll recant what I said that young pups often don't appear to need them, but there's a lot of things going through my head as I answer this question. Dogs are omnivores, and I put up a thing. Have I got one around here? No, a thing called a herbivore carnivore continuum. I've got bits of paper floating around. If you could see the state of my desk and stuff around me, anyway. It's not
busy minds, busy desks, active brains. You'll live forever, Ian.
Working on it, not very successfully. One end of this continuum is the herbivores. At the other end are the carnivores, the big cats, or all the cats.
Yeah, all the cats.
In the centre, we have things like humans, chickens, pigs. Between the herbivores at one end and the complete omnivores in the middle, we'll just go for humans at this stage. We've got rodents, for example, which are more grainivores to some degree. They're more herbivores, but they do obviously eat animal food. They also eat electric wires in your ceiling, but that's
another story. They are the true definition of scavengers, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then if we go between the omnivores in the centre, humans, pigs, chooks, or chickens if you're American, up the other end we have the true carnivores, or obligate carnivores, the cats. Moving back from that, we have animals like the wolf. Then moving back a bit more towards humans, we have the dog. The dog has evolved more as a vegetable eater, and I realise this very strongly from the work by, I wish I could remember his name, doesn't matter. He was a biologist, Coppinger, remembered it, Coppinger. Raymond Coppinger. I think
not Pottinger.
Coppinger, not Pottinger. That was
not Pottinger's cats. Yeah.
Coppinger wrote this lovely book called Dogs, and he's described the evolution of, or the transformation of the wolf into the dog on the rubbish dumps outside human settlements, and I talk about that a lot. That was in Pointing the Bone at Cancer. So this is where dogs as scavengers and as opportunists became more omnivorous, they became more coprophagic, and they became more scavenging, eating more bones even than the wolf. But the vegetables also were part of that whole scenario. And so what do they do? Well, we know much of the studies in human cancer, for example, show that the polyphenols, all the coloured pigments in vegetables, are so anti-cancer. This is true for our dog as well, and I use it constantly. Let's look at degenerative disease in dogs. One of the most widely used by me variation of the dog diet that I recommend is the kidney diet. And I couldn't call it a kidney diet, so I called it BARF Light. And so it was a patty that we produced. It was very high in vegetables. And these were low glycemic index vegetables. What was the benefit? Well, low glycemic index vegetables are full of fibre. Now, the fibre acts in the large bowel as a prebiotic, and it's attacked by certain bacteria. They make short-chain fatty acids out of it. Those short-chain fatty acids feed the bowel wall, they feed the bacteria, and they also go into the bloodstream. But the bacteria, having got a source of energy as short-chain fatty acids, now need a source of nitrogen to form their own protein. So having increased the thickness of the bowel wall and the blood supply to the bowel wall, they now have ready access to all the nitrogenous wastes within the bowel wall. And they take that out. So those nitrogenous wastes now bypass the kidneys and end up in the feces,
in the feces,
of the animal. And so this is the kidney diet, where you're reducing the nitrogenous load on the kidneys. And it's so simple. But what you're doing...
a study on that around the inulin, the benefit of feeding inulin to cancer, to kidney animal patients, so instead of that nitrogenous waste going through the urine, it goes through the feces, Yes.
So I point out this is the kind of like the bowels is acting in this respect, in the nitrogenous waste respect only, certainly not producing hormones or any other things that the kidneys do, but it's taking a load off the kidney, so it's acting as a third kidney in terms of nitrogenous waste. But this basic diet is also good for diabetes, it's good for cancer, it's good for liver disease. So we marketed that, and it was very successful. I think it's still being marketed, although I'm not sure. I don't follow.
I don't think I've ever seen the BARF light.
They may not market it anymore. They may not. If it's, I quickly found that any type of prescription diet didn't have enough market there to warrant commercial production.
Yes, that's the problem.
A bit sad in a way. Anyway, that's a whole other area that I actually talk about in my course that I'm just currently. Well, I have produced a course now for pet parents.
Yes, I've been not watching the course because I'm not in it, but I saw that you were doing that, and I was like, oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased that somebody's twisted my arm and made me take 3 months off from my life and not have a life and sit and talk to this computer all day about raw food.
Very receptive audience, the computer. They don't interrupt. They might crash every now and again. That's always fun.
That's right. Or tell me I haven't updated for a long time. I know.
Like, this morning.
Yes, exactly. That's what I hadn't done.
You're all updated now as far as...
Zoom is updated, so thank goodness. I was really worried. I thought a virus had attacked. Anyway, that's by the by. So vegetables are they are part of the dog diet. Let me go back also to other stuff, because in my early days, I was so fortunate having a variety of clients who had all sorts of backgrounds. And I met some people, and I'm thinking in particularly a German fellow who actually was living in England during the Second World War, but he had dogs, and he recounted how they fed. They went to the abattoirs and got the ruminal contents and the rumen itself, and that's all they fed their dogs for about 4 or 5 years during the war when there was no other food. He said they were never healthier. And this was a basically fermented vegetable diet with the rumen wall. And they reproduced and they grew, and these were big, strong, rotty dogs. Also, dogs with hip and elbow dysplasia, very early on I discovered that they're really bad. I mean, I could take a dog, and I can think of one in particular as a standout example. It was a little bulldog. It could not walk. It was a fat, rotund bulldog. What I did with these dogs who were severely hip or elbow dysplastic, I would say, this was when I learned about the word crate. We used to call it a cage, but whatever you want to call it. Anyway, the Americans call it crate, so that sounded very, very nice. Put your dog in a crate so it can't move, because these dogs, if they didn't exercise, their bones were so terrible that they would be deformed by the weight of the dog. So they had to stop. And I said, you're going to feed them vegetables only. Vegetables only, low glycemic index. You're going to buy all the veggies that are in season at the moment. You're going to put them through a juice, so you recombine the juice and the pulp. That's all you're going to give to your dog until I tell you to stop, and it might be 3 or 4, up to a month. These dogs would lose weight and they would transform on this diet. So there was no way that dogs are not able to eat this way. And these dogs, and people say, where do they get the calcium from? I said, well, you've ever seen a cow eat grass? Yes. Where does it get its calcium from?
Yeah,
and it's got these magnificent bones, and it produces milk that's full of calcium. Oh, okay. You know, the light goes on. Yeah. Anyway, so we would do this, and we saw so many dogs transform. I actually wrote about that. I think it's in the BARF diet. I also possibly wrote it in Grow Your Pups with Bones. A lot of these books I probably need to reproduce and put them out more specifically as to what they're doing. But right.
Yeah, I mean, they're like the core principles of raw feeding, like, you know, written in an entertaining way. Now, so vegetables, you say they're not necessarily needed, but they promote good health. Would that be correct?
Well, I suppose in the sense that they promote good health, they are needed. A lot. I think young dogs can get away with them, but as you get older,
all the exposures to
failure and everything else, it's a good thing to start if you haven't been adding them in. And if you get dogs used to eating them, that's fine too. But also understand they have to be in a particular format, totally crushed.
Yes.
And not lightly steamed, as some people want to do. Now, the reason they have to be totally crushed is another basic biological phenomenon or fact. Each plant cell wall, unlike an animal cell wall, is surrounded by cellulose. And we do not, as mammals, have cellulases. That is, enzymes that digest cellulose.
Yes.
So the bacteria in the large bowel do, as we've seen, but then you have to be able to release that cellulose. My clients have taught me everything over the years. One client fed lots of vegetables, but he grated it. And he had bought this little special dog compost sewage thing where the feces was supposed to go in and then dissipate and out and it would be fine. So he bought this and he said, but it continually fills up with these vegetables. I said, how are you producing your vegetables? Oh, I grate them. Proved to me what I already kind of knew, but it's wow, this has really proved that dogs cannot digest even grated vegetables. You have to break them down entirely. The best way to do that is with a juicer. Now, then you could say, well, there's no juicer.
Or a blender. Same thing. Food processor.
Better even than a blender usually. With a blender, you usually have to add a lot of juice, liquid to it.
Fluid, yeah.
But a juicer actually just does it without any added. But people say, but that's not evolutionary. I said, well, it is in a sense, except that it's fermented, because a cow actually, or any herbivore, will thoroughly chew the vegetation and break it down. So that's the job of the juicer and or the blender, but better the juicer. And so you release all that cellulose to be worked on by the bacteria in the bowel, what we now call the microbiome, and it's all very modern, but it's always been there, working away. And the juice is released because now the juice, which wasn't available to be used, with all the polyphenols, the enzymes, the vitamins, everything in there now is available for the dog to digest and for the microbiome to work upon.
But you're giving the pulp as well, right? Not just the juice.
Yes. Well, the pulp is the fiber part that's doing its job in the large bowel. It's the probiotic.
So it's not good enough to chuck it all in a food processor and mash it all up?
As long as you totally break it down, that's fine. Yeah. And the other thing that helps break it down is freezing it, because water expands when it freezes.
Yes.
So it breaks down the cell walls.
If you ever tried to freeze vegetables without blanching them first, oh my gosh, headache. It's food processor. What was I going to say? Food processor. Yeah, I always say it needs to look like mashed potato.
Yeah, it has to be juicy.
But like green and orange mashed potato. Yum, yum, yum. How much veg? If people are doing the raw meaty bones and they're doing muscle meats and they're doing organ meats, I don't think you're really going to specifics around percentages.
No. Let me give you a simple breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
60.
I know people will be thinking, well, okay, but how much do I feed?
60, 15, 15, 10.
No, 60, 15, 15, 10.
60% raw meaty bones, where the raw meaty bones are approximately half bone and half
meat, muscle,
and cartilage and whatever.
Yeah.
And the chicken wings and necks kind of fit into that situation. And they're from young animals, so they're not poxed and filled, and they're all that. So that's what they make a simple basis. And believe you me, people might think their animals are allergic to chicken, but they really are.
Yes.
It's the base of the terrible processed food they're in. So 60% raw meaty bones, 15% internal organs or offal. Now, people get hung up on secreting organs. Can I tell you that every organ that I've ever met secretes something? So
I just have an image of like kidney and liver and spleen and heart going, hi, Ian. So, even the heart? Even the heart?
Of course, everything secretes. It's just silly. It's just silly. People...
They say 5% liver, 5% other secreting.
I say 15%
as a whole category.
At least liver, kidney, and heart, and liver should equal liver, kidney, and heart combined. That's just a very simple rule of thumb, based mainly on the size of these organs. Then start to throw in whatever else if you can get hold of it. But if you do those, your dog's going to do really well if you do those as a minimum. So that's 15%. 15% veg, then 10% to make up for the revolting and rotten things, other things that dogs eat, such as soil, feces, rotting old bones. And in that, I will put fermented food, but also dogs. Okay, let's go to coprophagy.
Because people are like, what? You want me to put some poo in my dog's bowl and feed it to him? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of, but not quite.
They love cat poo.
Feces made up of? Feces is made up of the living and dead bodies, mainly, of bacteria, plus whatever has sloughed. That's a lovely word, S-L-O-U-G-H. Sloughed off from the bowel wall and been secreted by the guts, bowel, internal organs of the animal, the intestines of the animal. So it's all that, but it's to a large extent it's bacterial bodies alive and dead. So it's actually on that basis, it's high quality protein, it's essential fatty acids, it's the B vitamins, it's vitamin K. If you look at poo, it's almost a complete food.
Tasty.
So rather than do that, so we might throw in some eggs as a lovely protein.
Yes.
We now know that fertile eggs, by the way, contain a hormone that helps birds develop muscles and now helps older animals not develop cachexia. So fertile eggs are good. There's a reason for that, not just some naturopathic. There's a good scientific reason. Anyway, so eggs for protein, there's a good rationale for throwing in both cold water fish and maybe some fish oil as essential fatty acids. So we've got protein. It's a good idea to throw in fermented food. There's ferments in there. So pre and postbiotics, all that sort of stuff, and probiotics. It's all there. So, and that's where my recent excursion into working with Gussie's gut, because I realised, speaking of tripe, which we can't get a lot of, like green tripe in Australia. And the fact that dogs do like to eat fermented food, in other words, rotting and revolting food. This was a good. The plants that have been fermented under natural, so they've got a wide range of organisms, not just a few probiotics that have been duplicated many times in a laboratory, but the native bacteria. So all of that. So what are we looking at? Then, because dogs eat soil, kelp and loosened powder, because the kelp contains every mineral that's ever been washed into the sea, and things like vanadium and all these tiny amounts. We don't really know how important they are, but there have been some studies, for example, where somebody, a professor, was working with them in cancer patients and showed remarkable results. So again, it's just a matter of not really knowing necessarily what's going on, but trying to mimic what's going on in nature. Dogs eat soil. Kelp now contains that, as does alfalfa. So alfalfa got roots that go down maybe 40 feet.
Yeah, alfalfa is
those
beautiful.
Minerals that haven't been leached out. So again, it's very, very brilliant for that. And of course, there's the iodine situation, particularly in old countries like Australia, where the iodine has been leached out of the soils, and our good cousins across the ditch, in New Zealand, they have some parts have a selenium deficiency. So again, that helps with that. And in fact, there was one thing I did advocate brewer's yeast in the early days, but I don't suggest it, because a lot of dogs get allergies with it. But that's high in selenium and B vitamins, and it was very brilliant. Still a great supplement. Anyway, but basically that other 10% is trying to mimic all those other rotten things. So 60, 15, 15, 10 is a really good base for a bones and raw food diet, a raw food diet, an evolutionary diet. And the thing I emphasize is we are not feeding nutrients. We are feeding food.
Real food.
Real food, because if you look at AFCO, NRC, FEDIAF, all those authorities, they just have a limited range of nutrients that they specify, and that's all the food has to contain. Not only that, the food doesn't only have to just contain those, and the amounts is dubious because they really don't know the amounts and how good to do, because this knowledge is incomplete. What was I going to say? It's got to contain all those nutrients, but it doesn't contain all the nutrients that an animal requires. So you feed food, you feed the nutrients an animal, the nutrients we know about, the ones we don't know about, and the ones we don't yet understand as essential. You just get a lot.
Yeah.
It is so simple. All you're doing is feeding food that an animal evolved to require. And that
what about
15, 15, 10 covers it pretty well.
What about the cats, the meows? Okay. 60, 15, 15, 10 is not going to work for them. They won't eat that many vegetables.
Some cats do, and it's great for cats with kidney failure.
Well, my cats eat some vegetables. I make a powder that's a combination of greens and herbs and coconut and less.
If you have a cat that lives on a farm and brings home mice and tortures them for 3 or 4 hours before finally gulping them down?
I'm hungry now.
I've had enough of you. Oh my God.
I have a funny story actually. My youngest cat, he probably catches about 2 little birds a year. A few years ago, he caught one, brings it to the back door, and it was breakfast. He hadn't had breakfast yet. It was about to be breakfast time. So he brings in this bird. I'm like, Elva, you didn't. Oh, the poor bird. I know it's your instinct. I know, but I'm crying for the bird. You know, Mummy doesn't like you killing the birds. You don't need to kill the birds. Anyway, so he's like, okay, I want my breakfast. I'm like, well, there's your breakfast, dude. You catch it, you kill it, you eat it. That's the rule in this house. You know, you eat, that's your bread. And he wouldn't eat it. So I got his plate. I put the bird on the plate. I said, there you go. There's breakfast. He was like, what? I'm like, So then I was like, okay, I'll scrape some of this food on the bird. There you go. So he ate it. And so there's this whole process until finally he ate it all except for one little random feather that flew out the door. But it was like, dude, you can't kill a bird and just let it go to waste.
Well, he actually taught you one way to transition from one food to another by.
Well, I mean, I already knew, but I'm just
like, of course you did. Yes. But the point I was going to make was that in the guts or intestines of this animal, actually the gut, if we say gut without the S, that's fine. That's scientific. Yes. In the gut of that animal, there are vegetable materials.
Exactly. What do birds eat? What do mice eat?
I've put somewhere between 0 and 5% as what vegetable material for an average cat. But in all these cases, as animals get older, particularly with kidney failure, you increase the vegetable material.
Yeah.
And cats require probably more fat and less bones than a dog.
Yes.
Because they're more prey model.
Yeah, exactly.
And cats don't require. Cats are sprinters. They are not endurance animals. They don't require that much fat. Well, sorry, yes, they don't require that much fat. The dog actually can require a lot of fat if it's an endurance. And dogs are endurance sprinting animals. So cats require probably less fat, less bone, more meat, vegetable, and that's basically it. But if you feed a cat,
so it's extra bits as well, like you do with the dog.
Yes, and the extra bits as well. Yeah. If you feed a cat commercial dog food, it's going to be so lacking in so many things that the cat needs that it's going to become crook or sick, as they say in other parts of Australia. We just say, "Oh, geez, you're looking pretty crook, mate."
Yeah. You can feed a dog cat food, but don't feed the cat dog food.
That's with commercial food. But if you are feeding real food,
well, it's the same,
just different. No problems, mate. Exactly. No worries. No worries
real
at all.
Real food is the answer, people.
Yeah.
Can we talk? How much time do you have left?
What is the time? Not actually very little. I didn't realise.
Okay. I'm going to ask you 2 questions.
We can always come back at some time in the future and have another
something that I really, and we've kind of touched on it already, but the relevance to AFCO, NRC, FEDIAF, for those of you who don't know, they are the nutritional so-called requirements or recommendations that basically say a food needs to be complete and balanced. It needs to have these nutrients at these levels. How applicable are these guidelines to real food?
Forget about them.
That's all I wanted you to put forward. Yeah.
Forget about them. They're not important. Your dog and cat's needs vary moment to moment, day to day, week to week, season to season, year to year, age to age, reproductive state to whatever. But if you feed real food, the body actually sorts it out. Not only that, but your dog or cat will say, I really need more bones. And this will be, say, a lactating female dog.
Yes.
As I didn't say bitch.
Yes.
And so they require lots of raw meaty bones. And they require food. If you have a large breed dog with a large litter at peak lactation, 3 to 4 weeks, she needs all the food that she can possibly eat, probably spread throughout the day so we don't get bloat or something. But But it really is common sense. Most of the time, you've just got to think about it. But what I really like to impress upon people is this: you do not use a compute and a spreadsheet and have this worry about these micro and macronutrients and secreting organs and all the rest of it for your own diet. You don't have it. Our dogs and cats are built no differently to us. We all evolved over a long period of time, and our bodies have adapted to eat real food, take what they need from real food, so long as it's basically the food they've evolved to eat. So we don't feed cows whole cows, and we don't feed cats a plain grass paddock. I mean, we eat what they evolved to eat. It's beyond simple, really.
Yeah, it really is. Now, are you still, because I know sometimes you do consults and sometimes you don't, are you still practicing as a vet?
I'm not. I don't.
Or when the mood strikes you?
No, not so much that. I still do consults. I guess I've limited them because there's only so much of me to go around.
Exactly. You've got a gazillion other things that you're doing too.
Painting, for example. I love art.
Yes, landscapes. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Oh, you knew.
I follow you on Instagram, and there was a post.
And I did a few then, and I haven't done much, but I've actually just enrolled in a course because being colourblind, it's a real.
Be quite challenging.
Australian, it's a real mongrel.
You'd be like, wow, that's interesting colour choices, Ian. Well, I
Yes,
can't see
that's
them.
and that's what actually put me off for years. But anyway, that's by the by. Yes, I still do consults, but I'm hoping that the course I've just produced is, because it's so comprehensive, and I'm now also teaching a professional wing to that. In fact, I've just
Great.
had to record some of those, the professional wing of the basic course. The basic course is for everybody. Then for the professionals, I'm doing some extra stuff.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and so I guess I'm leaving a legacy that people can use.
Yeah, I love
Apparently,
that.
I won't be around forever, and it's always hard for us to believe that.
I know.
But
It's
I've
like,
noticed that's the way life is.
yeah, I still have so much more to do.
Well,
And what's,
whoever's in charge might let me go a bit longer, maybe.
yeah, maybe you're doing good work, but not that.
No, only the good die young.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Says
about
something about me.
when your time's up, your time's up. So
That's
who
right.
knows?
Totally.
And yeah, you've got ebooks, you've got your courses, you've got a gazillion articles. You've got, there's so much information out there. You do, for the cat people, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a book on feline nutrition in the works. Yes. Not yet?
It's kind of in the works, but I do give a fairly comprehensive. There is an ebook. What's it called?
Do you cover it in your course?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Because it's the pet food course, not the dog food. Ultimate Raw. I'm trying to read the words behind you. Ultimate Raw Pet.
Yeah, it's
food
pet.
Course.
We cover cats.
And there's a cat right there. Look at that cat under the fish. Yeah.
Yes.
So
you definitely cover cats, but cats are really simple.
I know, but people
simple to produce their food. The cats are cats themselves. I equate them to women, dogs to men.
Well, they are. Cats are
smart.
feminine. They are, and they're obviously
they're smart.
Like
men are just dopey. We are. I know.
Cats are elegant, like women.
All of that
Not
stuff.
all women are elegant, but the stereotypical.
And we never could understand a cat. For example, why do they circle in front of you at the top of the stairs? Are they trying to kill you? Trip over?
They're practicing their natural behaviours of hunting, stalking their prey, and then they're going to pounce on you. They got to get these needs met somehow. They may as well do it with their humans because why not?
Exactly.
Now,
right.
I have a closing question that I ask every guest, but I can't find it on my list, and now I got to text. I remember it. If there was one thing that you could change about the human-animal relationship, it doesn't have to be restricted to cats and dogs. This is, the Natural Animal podcast. But if there's one thing that you could change about the human-animal relationship, what would it be, Ian?
That humans understand very completely that animals are sentient beings.
Yes.
We understand that, particularly in terms of the way we're not going to stop farming them and eating them, I guess. So
it may happen.
It may, and
probably not in our lifetimes, but
no, maybe it will. But whatever we do, we have to treat them as what they are. The factory farming is beyond cruel.
Yeah.
I mean, even to the point. I mean, the words like slaughterhouse, all of that stuff.
I know. Well, that's why they don't really call them. We're going to slaughter. We're going to process the animals.
Yeah, I know. It's just just horrible. It is just horrible. And as I get older, I get more upset by that. And even though I do eat meat and all that sort of stuff, if we could just change the way people think and understand that these animals they think, they feel, they have emotions. They're like us.
Mm. Yep. They really are.
Yeah.
Cat, dog, cow, chicken, rabbit, pig, human.
Yeah. We all evolved together, and we are all on this planet together. We've evolved to have a very dominant position on the planet. I don't know whether we'll always retain it because we're so We're not so good. We're not nice animals a lot of the time.
I don't think nature will allow the human species to retain that dominance, because if she was to allow that, we would wipe ourselves. She may allow it so that Earth has the chance to regenerate and start over.
That's exactly right.
Never underestimate the power of nature.
So that would be my wish, that we, just as a race, and I guess we need to also be kind to that other animal that we know very well, the humans, because we're so unkind to each other.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Unkindness breeds more unkindness, whether, it doesn't matter what form the being takes, plant, animal, human.
And I know we're all human and we're all guilty of it, myself included, but we have to do better.
Yeah. That is a fabulous answer to that question. Brought up another question I'm not going to ask you. It has to be a whole... I need to do like 5 episodes with you, Ian. Thank you. Thank you for all of the wisdom that you shared with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this time with you. Love to have you back. I already know it. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ian.
Well, thank you for the conversation. It's been lovely talking to you. I hope there was some wisdom amongst all that. In fact, I know there was, because some of the things are absolutely true.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're not my ideas, they're just there.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
How amazing was that chat with Dr. B? Wow, so much wisdom in that discussion. I'm sure you loved the show. For all things Dr. B, head to drianbillinghurst.com. And if you're looking for pet food that aligns with the BARF principles we've just discussed, be sure to check out the beautiful pet foods available from the sponsor of this podcast, Frontier Pets. They provide better pet food for a better world, with premium quality ingredients sourced from ethical Australian suppliers that are human grade and evolutionary appropriate for your dogs and cats. Learn more at frontierpets.com.au and don't forget that special discount code NaturalAnimal15. If you enjoyed this show, I would love for you to leave a review. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you have ideas for show topics or guests, head over to ruthhatton.com/podcast and fill out the feedback form. All of the links that I've mentioned today will be in the show notes, so check those out. And until next week, big love to you and your animals.